Russia's top security official just warned the West, if you cross the next red line, Moscow could launch a preemptive strike. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Taiwan just carried out its largest ever air raid drill, locking down major cities as a simulated response to Chinese military pressure. These aren't isolated stories. They're signals that today's two most volatile flashpoints, Eastern Europe and the Western Pacific, are moving together, not apart. Let's be clear, this week the escalation meter jumped, not because of rumors or anonymous leaks, but due to open, verified moves. Dmitry Medvedev, Russia's former president and now the number 2 on the Russian Security Council, told the state agency TASS that the West's full-scale war against Moscow could justify a preemptive Russian strike. Multiple major outlets, including Reuters, picked up the story. Meanwhile, Taiwan's capital and several major cities went silent as air raid sirens blared and civilians rushed to shelters. This was the island's largest civil defense drill ever, and it wasn't just for show. Reuters and The Guardian confirmed it was a calculated demonstration meant for both Beijing and Washington. In both theaters, the message is clear: the rules of the game are changing and fast. Here on Safety Zone, we don't panic and we don't do clickbait, but sometimes the facts are urgent enough on their own. When you see orchestrated escalations in Russia and the Western Pacific within days of each other, you're witnessing a new phase of global tension, one where the next move could come from anywhere. The right mindset isn't panic, it's awareness. The key is to look for what's real, filter out the noise, and understand how these events might actually impact your life. Let's break down what's really happening on the Russia front. Dmitry Medvedev isn't just any official. As Putin's closest security advisor, he's often the first to float ideas Moscow is genuinely weighing. This week, Medvedev told TASS that the West is waging a full-scale hybrid war against Russia and suggested that preemptive strikes could be on the table if Russia's red lines are crossed. Reuters and BBC News both highlighted how the language marks a clear escalation. But to be precise, there's no sign of an imminent attack. What's changed is the rhetoric and the timing. In parallel, Russia's defense ministry staged major nuclear force readiness drills, announced in advance and covered by United 24, media, and the diplomat. These drills featured the RS-24 Yars intercontinental missile system, which is mobile, difficult to target, and central to Russia's modern retaliatory strategy. Unlike previous maneuvers, this round saw missile launchers redeploying rapidly, working with bomber patrols and ground units. Analysts cited by BBC News and Reuters point out that these drills, coming right after NATO deployments to Eastern Europe and renewed redline warnings, are more than routine. In NATO's own words, these moves send an unmistakable signal of deterrence. According to the diplomat, Russia's latest defense doctrine actually puts mobile launchers at the center of their survivable deterrence, meaning these drills aren't just about optics. When a former advisor to U.S. Strategic Command was interviewed by Reuters, he summed it up. This is Russia showing its strategic deterrent is operational, not theoretical. That's not saber rattling, that's posture. Now, let's talk about Taiwan. For many Americans, Taiwan might sound distant, a tiny island that makes the news only when U.S. politicians mention it, or when there's a spike in tension with China. But here's why it matters. Taiwan is not just a dot off China's coast. It's a thriving democracy with a population of over 23 million people, and it's the beating heart of the world's high-tech supply chain. Nearly every advanced smartphone, laptop, and even the servers that run the internet depend on microchips manufactured by Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, which alone produces more than 90% of the globe's most advanced chips. Without Taiwan, the entire global tech sector would face catastrophic shortages, and that would ripple into everything from national defense systems to basic everyday electronics. The United States doesn't have a formal mutual defense treaty with Taiwan like it does with NATO countries, but the Taiwan Relations Act makes it clear. The U.S. is committed by law to help Taiwan defend itself. That doesn't mean American troops would automatically fight on Taiwan's behalf, but it does mean the U.S. regularly supplies advanced weapons, shares intelligence, and runs joint training. China, on the other hand, sees Taiwan as a breakaway province, one that it has never controlled, but claims as its own. For decades, Beijing has insisted on a policy known as One China, and although its leaders speak of peaceful reunification, they've never ruled out using force. President Xi Jinping has made reunification a core part of his legacy, and the People's Liberation Army has ramped up pressure with near-daily incursions of fighter jets and warships around the island. The stakes are massive. If conflict breaks out over Taiwan, it's not just a local fight. U.S. credibility as a global security provider is on the line. Japan, South Korea, and Australia, America's key allies in the Pacific, would face direct consequences. Global supply chains would seize up. The price of basic electronics could soar, and the stock market could swing wildly. And, most dangerously, the crisis could draw in major militaries on both sides, risking a wider war that few want, but everyone has to prepare for. That's why this week's events matter. On July 17th, Taiwan held its largest ever air raid drill, not as a token gesture, but as a full-scale test of civil defense readiness. The capital city Taipei and other major urban centers went into a real lockdown. Streets emptied, shops closed, and millions of citizens moved to underground shelters or secure locations as air raid sirens echoed through the city. This wasn't just a drill on paper. Chinese warplanes and naval ships were conducting maneuvers in the air and waters around Taiwan at the same time, a fact confirmed by both Reuters and Nikkei Asia. In response, Taiwan's military deployed American-made HIMARS rocket systems and activated Patriot missile batteries, the same technology that protects U.S. forces in Europe and the Middle East. According to The Guardian and Nikkei Asia, this wasn't just a military exercise, but a shift in public mentality. Regular people are learning to take shelter, read emergency alerts, and stock basic supplies. It's the kind of change that only happens when a society truly feels the threat. For Washington, it's a sign that Taipei is serious about self-defense. And for Beijing, it's a warning that any attempt at forced reunification will be costly. Bottom line, any escalation over Taiwan won't stay in the Pacific. If shooting starts, U.S. ships and aircraft will likely respond within hours. The economic shock will hit the West Coast and Wall Street almost instantly. In a globalized world, a conflict in Taiwan is a conflict that everyone, sooner or later, will have to deal with. Now here's the big picture, the part that most news headlines miss entirely. Why are these stories, Russian nuclear drills and Taiwan's heightened civil defense, suddenly happening at the same time? It's not just coincidence, and the most credible analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, as well as major foreign policy journals like Foreign Affairs, are sounding the alarm. The world's top U.S. adversaries are moving away from isolated one-off crises and starting to coordinate their actions across multiple regions and domains, what experts call multi-domain escalation. What does that really mean? It means Russia, China, and to a certain extent Iran and North Korea are each pushing the boundaries in their own regions, but they're also paying close attention to how the West reacts in one theater and adjusting their moves in another. Take the last 12 months as a case study. When Russia stages a high-profile nuclear readiness drill, like the recent Yars missile exercises, complete with public statements and military footage, it's not just about reminding NATO that Russia still has teeth. It's also a way to pull Western attention and resources back to Europe, making it harder for Washington to focus on the Pacific at the same time. Meanwhile, when Taiwan ramps up its air raid drills and deploys U.S. missile systems in response to Chinese pressure, it's not just about local defense. Beijing is watching closely, taking notes on how U.S. support is delivered, what political limits exist in Congress, and how much risk the West is willing to stomach in an election year. Over the past 2 years, Russia and China have accelerated their joint military exercises, conducting naval drills in the Sea of Japan and the Mediterranean, as well as combined air patrols along sensitive borders. Intelligence sharing, once rare, is now routine. Chinese drones fly over Eastern Europe using Russian-developed countermeasures, while Russian cyber units train alongside Chinese teams in mock scenarios against Western infrastructure. Even the official rhetoric lines up. Both capitals frame their actions as defensive responses to Western aggression, a message amplified across state media, diplomatic channels, and even friendly governments in the global south. According to detailed reports from Foreign Affairs and Reuters, Washington's real concern is not that Moscow and Beijing will launch a coordinated attack on the same day, but that each side could use a crisis in the other's backyard as cover or distraction. Imagine, China ramps up pressure on Taiwan, sending ships, launching missiles, threatening an invasion. The U.S. and its allies rush to reinforce the Pacific, shifting resources and political attention. At that exact moment, Russia could seize a window of opportunity to escalate in Ukraine, threaten the Baltics, or disrupt European energy supplies, knowing the West's bandwidth is stretched thin. Or flip the scenario. A sudden crisis in Eastern Europe could give Beijing more space to maneuver in the South China Sea or around Taiwan. This isn't science fiction. It's chess at a global scale. U.S. officials are now forced to monitor and respond to crises on 2, even 3 fronts, with the added pressure that any mistake, any overreaction or delayed decision could trigger an unintended escalation. And as the boundaries between information warfare, cyber attacks, and conventional force blur, it becomes even harder to tell what's a feint and what's a real move. Bottom line, these aren't random disconnected flare-ups. This is a deliberate evolving pattern, one where America and its allies are being tested in real time, and where coordination among its rivals could tip the balance of global power in unpredictable ways. So what does this mean for you? First, don't get distracted by rumors of imminent war. Instead, watch for real changes on the ground. New deployments of U.S. bombers in Europe, the Pentagon moving major units to higher alert, or sudden travel advisories for diplomats. On the other side, pay attention if Russia launches unscheduled missile tests, or China moves amphibious forces near Taiwan. Unusual financial signals, like sudden spikes in oil prices or big moves in global markets, can also show that governments are taking action behind the scenes. Whenever you hear a news story, check if it's confirmed by outlets like Reuters, BBC, or Foreign Affairs. And always ask, are leaders changing what they do or just what they say? In an age of information war, the loudest headlines are often just the tip of the iceberg. Quick recap, so far we've seen Russia and Taiwan both escalate in visible, calculated ways. But here's a pattern that often gets missed. Adversaries don't just bluff, they look for hesitation. If the U.S. or its allies delay, show confusion, or disagree in public, that's when Moscow and Beijing press harder. But coordinated responses, visible deployments, united political statements usually cause them to pull back, at least for now. Watch for a surge in peace talk stories or sudden back channels in the coming weeks. That's all part of the pressure cycle, not real de-escalation. By the way, I want to hear from you. Which do you see as the bigger risk? Russia-NATO standoff or Taiwan-China confrontation? Drop your take in the comments, and in just a moment, I'll show you a warning sign almost nobody's talking about. Now here's what I see. The real risk isn't an all-at-once world war, but a slow escalation through tit-for-tat moves, information ops, cyber attacks, and brinksmanship. Each new maneuver, whether a missile drill in Russia or a citywide air raid exercise in Taiwan, raises the global temperature just a bit more. And each is designed to probe, test, and sometimes normalize the idea that confrontation is just business as usual. As CSIS analysts note, the danger is that all these mini-crises eventually overlap. That's why it's critical to read between the lines and follow credible sources, not just whatever's trending online. My read is this. While a direct, immediate conflict is unlikely unless someone badly miscalculates, the risk of a drawn-out escalation is real and rising. Every new drill, warning, or show of force is another roll of the dice. For anyone paying attention, the smart move isn't to panic. It's to stay vigilant, watch the signals, and always be ready for headlines to become reality much faster than anyone expects. Looking ahead, the fact that these crises are overlapping is a warning. The era of simple, single-front confrontations is over. What happens in Taiwan can reshape Europe's security and vice versa. The world is shifting to a landscape where readiness, information, and resilience matter as much as weapons or territory. The most prepared aren't the ones who wait for breaking news, they're the ones who see it coming. If you've watched this far, you're not just scrolling, you're actually thinking ahead. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't have to chase rumors. You'll get straight facts and clear signals every time. And remember, when the next headline drops, you'll be ready